In 1946, America was victorious, but exhausted. Soldiers returned home, families reunited, and dinner tables were finally full again. Yet frugality lingered like a shadow of the war. In modest suburban kitchens across the country, home cooks got creative. With ration books tucked away but not forgotten, they embraced canned meats, powdered milk, and garden vegetables. These weren't fancy banquet meals, but hearty, clever, comforting recipes, designed to stretch ingredients and lift spirits. From Spam bakes to mock apple pies, the 1940s brought a unique blend of thrift and pride to the American table. These dishes weren't just about feeding the family, they were symbols of victory, survival, and resilience. Today, we're uncovering 15 forgotten medium-class family recipes that define the flavor of post-war America. Recipes that disappeared from our cookbooks, but still whisper from the past, from casserole dishes in Michigan to biscuit tins in Ohio. You'll be surprised at what counted as a feast, and how good it actually tasted. So roll up your sleeves, open the pantry, and travel back with me to a time when the war was over, but the creativity in the kitchen had only just begun. The war was over, but the gardens kept growing. In every backyard, between clotheslines and chicken coops, sprouted rows of beans, tomatoes, squash, and carrots. They called them victory gardens, a patriotic push that turned ordinary citizens into wartime farmers. But when peace returned, so did the recipes. This dish, the Victory Garden Vegetable Casserole, was a post-war triumph. Born from homegrown abundance and post-ration frugality, it was the kind of meal that made a family feel rich even when the budget said otherwise. At its heart, freshly boiled or sautéed vegetables, carrots, peas, green beans, maybe even turnips, folded into a creamy white sauce made with evaporated milk and a bit of flour. If you had cheese left over from the ration years, you'd sprinkle a little on top. And the crust? Often just crushed soda crackers mixed with margarine, no need for store-bought breadcrumbs. Baked until bubbling and golden, it smelled like comfort and tasted like hope. Families would gather around the table, proud of what their own soil had produced. Kids who had helped plant the seeds now forked into the results. It was more than food, it was proof that they had made it through. The Victory Garden Vegetable Casserole may seem humble today, but in 1946, it was a celebration in a baking dish. In the years following World War II, one canned item reigned supreme: Spam. It had fed troops in trenches, mess halls, and Navy ships, and when those soldiers came home, Spam came with them. But Americans were ready to brighten things up. Enter the Spam and Pineapple Bake, a sweet and savory creation that felt like a Hawaiian vacation in a baking dish, even if you'd never left Ohio. Sliced Spam was arranged neatly in a casserole dish, each piece topped with a pineapple ring, straight from the can, syrup and all. A dash of brown sugar or a drizzle of mustard glaze turned it into a makeshift ham roast, without the cost. This was the era of ration memory and ingenuity. Housewives, still wired for thrift, knew how to stretch a meal. And this dish was dependable, salty, sweet, warm, and hearty. Kids loved the flavor. Dads appreciated the novelty. And Mom? She could make it in under 30 minutes and still serve something special. It wasn't gourmet, but it was pure Americana. Bubbly, golden, and kitschy in the best way. Today, the Spam and Pineapple Bake feels like a relic of a bygone optimism, a time when the country wanted sweetness on its plate and predictability at dinner time. It's one of those forgotten recipes that may just deserve one more round at your family table. By 1943, fresh meat was scarce, but creativity wasn't. Families across America found ways to turn humble pantry staples into meals that felt special. One of the most cherished of these creations was the tuna mornay, a creamy, baked casserole that quietly made tuna a hero of wartime kitchens. Canned tuna had only recently become widely available, and it quickly became a favorite for its shelf life and versatility. In the mornay, it was paired with a bechamel-style white sauce, butter, flour, milk, thickened to the perfect silkiness. To that, housewives added shredded cheddar or American cheese, if they had any left from rationing, turning it into a cheesy, filling sauce that cloaked the tuna like a hug. Often mixed with elbow macaroni or served over rice or toast, tuna mornay was baked until golden and bubbling, with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers on top for a crunchy finish. Leftover peas or boiled carrots were sometimes stirred in to stretch it further. No bite went to waste. This dish became a weeknight staple for middle-class families. It was warm, affordable, and comforting. For children who had grown up with food stamps and powdered eggs, tuna mornay felt like luxury. More than just sustenance, it represented a return to normalcy. A warm oven, a mother humming in the kitchen, plates scraped clean. Though tuna mornay has nearly vanished from the modern table, it once held a proud place at America's post-war dinner hour. And for many, the smell of bubbling cheese and fish still stirs up memories of safety, survival, and hope baked into a casserole dish. In the years just after World War II, meat was back, but not in abundance. Families still practiced ration-minded cooking, stretching every scrap. That's where the biscuit-crusted meat pie came in, a practical, comforting meal that made a little meat go a long way. This wasn't a fancy roast. It was made with ground beef, chopped leftover steak, or even cold roast scraps, whatever was on hand. The meat was seasoned with onions, a touch of Worcestershire sauce, and maybe a spoonful of leftover gravy. Carrots and peas, often from a victory garden or canned stockpile, were mixed in to bulk it up. But the real star? The biscuit crust. Light, flaky, and easy to whip up from flour, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and whatever milk or shortening was available. The dough was rolled out and pressed over the hot meat filling in a casserole dish. It baked golden and puffed, like a savory cobbler with a crispy crown. When it hit the table, the pie was steaming, rich, and filling, and it looked like something you'd see in a restaurant, even if it cost next to nothing. It was one of those proud, make-do meals that reminded families of how far they'd come from ration lines and powdered substitutes. In homes from Indiana to Oregon, this was Tuesday night dinner. No waste, no frills, just warmth, economy, and satisfaction baked into every bite. The biscuit-crusted meat pie is a snapshot of post-war resilience, a family favorite built from scraps, wrapped in simplicity, and baked with gratitude. It was salty, creamy, and everywhere. In Army mess halls, Navy galleys, and later, on suburban American breakfast tables. Creamed chipped beef on toast, known to soldiers as SOS, was the wartime meal no one forgot, and some secretly loved. Originally created as a military staple during World War II, it was designed to be fast, filling, and made from shelf-stable rations. Thin slices of dried beef, almost like salty lunch meat, were chopped and tossed into a roux of butter, flour, and evaporated milk. The result? A rich, white gravy that coated everything it touched. It was ladled generously over toasted white bread, sometimes biscuits if you were lucky, and served piping hot. For millions of returning soldiers, SOS was a familiar taste that reminded them of camaraderie, survival, and the strange comfort of routine. When the war ended, many brought the recipe home. Housewives, dealing with tight budgets and leftover rations, adopted it with small twists, adding pepper, a splash of Worcestershire, or even peas when available. It became a regular breakfast or supper dish in countless middle-class homes. Some kids grew up hating it. Others asked for seconds. But no one forgot it. Creamed chipped beef on toast might seem simple, even crude, by today's standards. But in the 1940s, it was warm, reliable, and symbolic. It stretched a small amount of meat to feed a full table. And it made the transition from battlefield to family life just a little bit smoother. This was more than food, it was a piece of history on a plate. It wobbled. It shimmered. And in the 1940s, it was considered downright elegant. Carrot mold salad was one of the shining stars of the post-war American dinner table, especially for middle-class families looking to impress on a budget. This wasn't just a pile of shredded carrots. It was a carefully molded creation made with orange jello, finely grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and sometimes chopped celery or walnuts. The mixture was poured into a ring mold or a glass dish, then chilled until firm, creating a vibrant, gelatinous centerpiece that was equal parts salad and spectacle. The result? a cold, sweet and savory dish that caught the light and turned heads at potlucks, church suppers, and bridge club luncheons. To the modern eye, it might seem bizarre. But in its time, it was stylish, even progressive. Carrot mold salad reflected the mid-century obsession with convenience and presentation. It used canned and boxed goods, saved time, and still made the homemaker look polished and modern. The molded salad was a sign that your kitchen was up to date, that you were in step with the future. Served alongside a scoop of cottage cheese or a dollop of mayonnaise, this dish bridged the line between dessert and side dish. Kids were intrigued. Adults were impressed. And housewives could breathe easy knowing it could be made hours ahead of time. Today, carrot mold salad is a forgotten curiosity, a relic of gelatin-era innovation. But back then, it was cool, clever, and utterly respectable. And if you ever decide to make one yourself, don't be surprised when your guests pause, stare, and say, "Wait, what is that?" It smelled like apples. It looked like apples. It tasted like apples, but there wasn't a single apple in sight. This was the magic of the mock apple pie, one of the most clever and surprising desserts ever baked in a wartime American kitchen. The idea started during the Great Depression and was perfected during World War II, when apples were either out of season or too expensive for many suburban families. But home bakers still wanted a comforting slice of pie on the table. So they turned to something unexpected: Ritz crackers. The recipe was printed right on the box. Crushed Ritz crackers, layered into a pie crust, were doused with a spiced sugar syrup made of water, lemon juice, cinnamon, and cream of tartar. As it baked, the crackers softened and absorbed the flavors, and when cooled, the texture and taste were shockingly close to real apples. Topped with a flaky crust and served with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, this pie tricked guests and delighted children. It was culinary illusion, born from scarcity and resourcefulness. Mock apple pie became a symbol of ingenuity, a way to bring sweetness to the table when fresh produce was a luxury. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was a lifeline for homemakers determined to keep tradition alive with whatever they had. And even today, if you close your eyes and take a bite, you might swear you're tasting cinnamon apples, even though it's really just butter, crackers, and a bit of magic. Before fast food, frozen dinners, or instant anything, there was fricassee. And in 1940s America, chicken fricassee over rice wasn't just dinner, it was tradition passed down in a gravy-soaked spoon. Fricassee is one of the oldest techniques in American kitchens, a method brought from European roots, adapted by generations of home cooks. In the 1940s, it became a favorite in middle-class homes because it made a little chicken stretch a long way and turned it into something truly special. The dish started with pieces of bone-in chicken, thighs, drumsticks, whatever was available. These were lightly browned in a skillet with butter, then slowly simmered in a rich, creamy gravy made from broth, milk, onions, and sometimes mushrooms or celery. It wasn't thick like stew or thin like soup, it was that perfect middle ground, silky and comforting. Served hot over a bed of fluffy white rice, chicken fricassee was a Sunday supper standout or a weeknight reward after a long day. The sauce seeped into every grain, and the tender chicken practically fell off the bone. This wasn't a meal made in a hurry. It took time, care, and patience, but in return, it fed the whole family with warmth and depth that no canned dinner could match. Fricassee told a story of old-world cooking adapted for modern America, of frugal housewives turning basics into beauty, and of the quiet power of home-cooked meals that filled bellies and hearts without fanfare. In every bite, there's softness, richness, and that unmistakable feeling that you're home. In a time of ration books and resourcefulness, the 1940s home cook turned to invention, and the result was often surprising. One such creation? The wartime macaroni loaf, a dish that stretched leftovers, minimized waste, and somehow still brought the family together. This wasn't your typical pasta dish. Instead of saucy noodles, the macaroni was bound together in loaf form, sliced and served like meatloaf, but entirely meatless if necessary. It was a Depression-era concept refined during World War II, especially in medium-class suburban homes where budgets were tight and meat was often rationed. The base was boiled elbow macaroni, mixed with eggs, breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, cheese if available, and sometimes chopped vegetables, celery, onions, or even a little grated carrot for color. If there was any leftover ham or canned meat, it might be diced in. The whole mixture was pressed into a loaf pan and baked until golden on the outside, firm enough to slice. What came out of the oven was humble but hearty. Often served with a ladle of tomato sauce or creamed mushroom gravy on top, it was a clever way to stretch ingredients and still serve something warm, filling, and comforting. This dish represents the ingenuity of wartime kitchens, where homemakers had to make do, yet still found ways to nourish and satisfy. Wartime macaroni loaf may be forgotten now, but in its day, it was a symbol of care and cleverness. Proof that a full plate didn't require abundance, only a little creativity and a lot of love. In the post-war 1940s, presentation mattered just as much as taste. Families might be eating on a budget, but when guests came over or Sunday dinner rolled around, dishes had to impress. That's where the beet and egg salad ring took center stage. It was bold, it was bright, and it made a statement, even if the ingredients were humble. This vibrant pink ring was crafted from canned or cooked beets, hard-boiled eggs, vinegar, and unflavored gelatin. Once set in a circular mold, it became a chilled salad centerpiece that was as eye-catching as it was refreshing. Middle-class families favored recipes like this because they used pantry staples and required no oven time, perfect for warm weather or tight schedules. The beets gave the dish its iconic magenta hue, while chopped eggs and onions added texture and bite. The gelatin held everything together, creating a wobbly yet satisfying bite that paired surprisingly well with lettuce and a spoonful of mayonnaise or cottage cheese in the center. It might sound strange today, but back then, molded salads were culinary fashion. They conveyed modernity, domestic skill, and just a touch of extravagance, all without breaking the budget. Served on a glass platter with crisp greens, the beet and egg salad ring was meant to impress. And in many homes, it succeeded, adding color and character to otherwise modest meals. Today, it's a forgotten gem of food history. But in the 1940s, it was a showstopper, and a reminder that even simple ingredients, with a little creativity, could become something truly extraordinary. In the cold months of the 1940s, nothing said comfort quite like the smell of ham hock and cabbage stew simmering on the stove. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, rich with flavor, and deeply tied to the spirit of the era. This dish traces its roots to frugal immigrant cooking, embraced widely by American families who knew how to stretch a dollar without sacrificing satisfaction. In medium-class suburban homes, especially during and after World War II, ham hocks were prized, inexpensive cuts full of flavor, perfect for feeding a family without touching the precious meat rations. The stew began with ham hocks slowly boiled to release their smoky essence, creating a deep, savory broth. Into that pot went wedges of cabbage, chunks of potato, carrots, and sometimes onion or turnip, whatever was on hand or in the root cellar. The hock meat, once tender, was pulled from the bone and returned to the pot, adding richness to every spoonful. It was a dish that took time, hours to simmer, but required very little active work. And the reward was a bubbling pot of rustic warmth that could last for days, served with nothing more than a hunk of bread or a biscuit on the side. Ham hock and cabbage stew wasn't just about flavor. It was about resilience, making the most of what you had, and feeding your loved ones with care, no matter what the pantry looked like. Today, it's rarely seen on tables, but in its day, it was a staple of working families and suburban kitchens alike. A stew that told a story, one smoky, steamy bowl at a time. You could smell it before the sun came up. A savory sizzle on the skillet, the scent of cornmeal and pork crisping at the edges. In 1940s America, cornmeal scrapple squares weren't just breakfast. They were a survival tactic turned tradition. Scrapple has deep roots in colonial and Pennsylvania Dutch cooking, but by the mid-20th century, it had found a place in the kitchens of practical, middle-class families across America. Especially in post-war years, when waste was unthinkable and every ingredient mattered. The base was humble: pork trimmings, organ meats, and broth, simmered down until tender, then thickened with yellow cornmeal and seasoned with sage, black pepper, and onion. The dense mixture was poured into a loaf pan to chill and set overnight. Once firm, it was sliced into squares, then pan-fried until golden and crisp on the outside, creamy on the inside. These squares were served hot at breakfast, often with eggs, apple butter, or syrup, but just as likely to appear in a lunchbox or next to stewed tomatoes at dinner. They were filling, inexpensive, and loaded with flavor. For medium-class families trying to stretch a dollar or use every scrap, scrapple was more than food. It was philosophy, frugality without sacrifice, creativity without compromise. Though scrapple fell out of favor in many modern kitchens, its legacy remains, a reminder of how American cooks once turned the overlooked into the unforgettable. Cornmeal scrapple squares were crispy, creamy, and unapologetically resourceful. And maybe it's time they made their way back to the table. Before boxed cake mixes and store-bought sweets took over, dessert in a 1940s American home often meant one thing: pudding. But not the creamy kind. We're talking about the old-fashioned, steamed kind, like dried fruit pudding with hard sauce. This was a dish steeped in tradition, a nod to English Christmas puddings but adapted for middle-class American kitchens. It wasn't fancy, but it was rich, deeply spiced, and surprisingly celebratory, especially in post-war households looking to bring joy back to the dinner table. The pudding started with a mixture of chopped dried fruits, raisins, currants, prunes, or whatever was on hand. These were soaked to plump up, then mixed with flour, breadcrumbs, sugar, eggs, and warm spices like cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg. Some recipes called for a splash of molasses or even black coffee, giving the pudding a dark, complex flavor. Once combined, the batter was poured into a greased mold or coffee can, covered tightly, and steamed gently for hours. What emerged was a dense, moist cake, not too sweet, but packed with rich, fruity depth. But the real magic? The hard sauce. A decadent blend of butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla, sometimes with a dash of rum or brandy if the pantry allowed. Served warm over a slice of pudding, it melted into the nooks and crevices, creating a silky, sweet finish that turned a modest dessert into something downright luxurious. For medium-class families of the 1940s, this dessert felt like a celebration of making it through, of holding on to old traditions, and of finding sweetness in scarcity. Dried fruit pudding with hard sauce may have faded from memory, but for those who tasted it, it was unforgettable. In the 1940s, when guests dropped by without warning and luncheons were still an art form, quick and clever sandwiches were a hostess's best friend. And one of the most popular? Deviled ham tea sandwiches, spicy, savory, and proudly homemade. Deviled ham was born from thrift and necessity. Canned meats like Underwood deviled ham were pantry staples during wartime rationing, but many homemakers made their own, blending leftover cooked ham with tangy mustard, mayonnaise, chopped pickles, and a dash of cayenne or hot sauce. The result was creamy, zesty, and bold. For tea sandwiches, this fiery mixture was spread thinly between slices of soft white bread, with the crusts neatly trimmed and the sandwiches cut into dainty triangles or rounds. Often served on tiered trays or alongside molded salads, they offered bite-sized bursts of flavor that felt surprisingly elegant, despite their humble ingredients. In middle-class American homes, these sandwiches were a go-to for baby showers, church socials, bridge clubs, and Sunday brunches. They could be made in bulk, looked polished, and were guaranteed to disappear quickly. But there was more to them than convenience. Deviled ham reflected a moment when resourcefulness met creativity, where even a bit of leftover meat could be transformed into something refined and memorable. Though tea sandwiches have largely faded from modern menus, their charm and their flavor haven't disappeared. Deviled ham tea sandwiches were proof that you didn't need fancy ingredients to impress. Just a little spice, a little care, and a sharp knife to cut the crusts. A forgotten classic from a time when hospitality lived in the small, savory details. Our journey through America's forgotten post-war recipes ends with a warm, sweet note: the molasses oatmeal drop biscuit. Soft, rustic, and quietly nourishing, this humble treat was the taste of comfort in many 1940s homes. These weren't the flaky buttermilk biscuits you find in diners today. No, these were softer, denser, made for moments when sugar was scarce and every spoonful had to count. Housewives mixed rolled oats, flour, baking soda, and a pinch of salt, then added rich blackstrap molasses and a little fat, sometimes just bacon drippings or shortening. The dough was scooped by spoon onto baking sheets, baked until golden, and served warm. The molasses gave them a deep, earthy sweetness, not overpowering, but soothing. Paired with butter, apple jelly, or eaten plain beside a bowl of soup, these drop biscuits were nourishment in every bite. In an era still recovering from war, molasses oatmeal drop biscuits reminded families of simpler joys. Of full stomachs. Of shared meals. Of finding sweetness in the small things. Brief pause. And maybe that's what these recipes are really about. Resilience. Ingenuity. Love expressed through food. They weren't lavish. But they were enough. More than enough. Thank you for walking with us through these quiet, powerful corners of American culinary history, where every dish has a story, and every bite carries the memory of those who came before. If you found meaning, nostalgia, or maybe even inspiration in these forgotten flavors, consider subscribing to our channel. We're uncovering the recipes history left behind, one dish at a time. Until next time, keep the past on your plate and the stories alive at your table.